So thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a great turnout. Our goal this evening is to educate and to inform everyone that's here about our draft FY26 school budget. This is a public input meeting, which means that anybody from the public has the ability to say their piece. Again, we have another meeting at 7 o'clock, so any questions or concerns that you don't get to air tonight, there will be a QR code at the end of the presentation, and you can click on it and you can submit anything that you want to ask or say, and we'll create a document, an FAQ document, a response document to make sure that we get to all your questions, and we can have many, many more informational meetings if need be, based on your input. So we're going to get started. So first, just to kind of explain our budget process, we start this process back in September, and this is really difficult because it's hard to predict what our revenue will be, what our expenses will be, what can happen over the course of the year, and yet we have to start to build a budget a year in advance. So we start in September and October. We look at data, previous year's data, current data, enrollment, staffing, our special education numbers, our EL numbers, costs of transportation, etc., and anything that potentially has changed since last year, and where do we currently stand financially? Do we have any savings from the previous year? Then in November, the school committee sets parameters for us as a district, how they want us to create the upcoming budget. For this year, it's a level services budget, which means all things stay the same except maybe costs, because obviously there's inflation, there's raises, etc., but that the students get level services going into the following year. But this could include reorganization of positions or programs to align with student needs. Then in December through January, the principals and the directors of all the different departments assess the needs of their individual buildings and their departments, and they submit their building and department level budgets to myself and Mrs. Walker for review, and we sit down and meet with them, sometimes several times with the same individual, to talk about their needs and justifications for what they're asking for, and then potentially sometimes have additional staffing discussions to identify any cuts if necessary. In February, Mrs. Walker and I meet with Mr. Gaudette, our town manager, to review what potential funds, estimated funds, the town will contribute to the school department budget. The school committee meets with all of us from central office, as well as the principals and all the department managers, to review the proposed budgets, their budget binders, and any staff reorganizations or any necessary reductions or potential additions that we're requesting for the budget. And then we have additional budget subcommittee meetings as needed throughout this process. And then in March, I present the superintendent's recommended budget to the school committee, which includes input from all of these previous meetings, and we present our budget as well to the town finance committee. There's a public hearing on the proposed budget at school committee, and then finally the school committee votes on the recommended budget after all of those meetings, and that will be at the end of March. So just to let you know, who are our students here in Northbridge, and how has our demographic and our population changed over time? This is a really important thing to understand as we develop this budget. Our ELs are our English learners, students whose first language is not English. Our SWD, as you can see there, are students with disabilities, anybody that is on an IEP in our district. Low income is LI, and high needs is any student that falls into the low income, economically disadvantaged EL or former EL or a student with disabilities. So we show you this chart to show you that our enrollment back in 2019, 2020 was almost 2,000 students. Our enrollment now is 1,838 students, so we're down 161 students since 2019. However, the number of EL students has gone up by 50. Our students with disabilities has gone up, according to this chart, by 9. Last year we had more. We dropped a little bit this year. Our low-income students number has gone up by 100, and our high-needs students have gone up over 100, and yet our enrollment has gone down. So these are big numbers, and it does have a big impact on how we have to spend our funds. So this is the average cost to educate in Massachusetts. So these are the foundation budget rates. So as you can see, a kindergarten student full day, the base allocation for one kindergarten student is about $10,000, about $10,000 for an elementary, close to 10 for middle, and then almost 12 for high school. Then, if that student is an English learner, you can add about $3,000 to $3,500 to that base allocation. If that student is low income, for our particular district, it's about a $6,700 increase to that base allocation. And if that student is a student with disabilities, you can add another $32,000 to that base allocation. And that's for a student in our Northbridge Public Schools district. So you can see the range. It's a very wide range there for what one student costs to educate in our district. Our per pupil expenditures that we spend, the average, is $16,723. But as you can see, it costs a lot more than that to educate the vast majority of our kids. The state average PPE is $20,767.41. So we're well below the state average for per pupil spending. So I wanted to just show you some concrete examples of why this is. So this is not an actual picture of a student in our district, but this is an example from an IEP of a student in our district, a grade 1 student. The base PPE for this grade 1 student is $10,187. This is a low-income student, so you have to add $6,738.84. This student has a one-to-one paraprofessional throughout the school year, so add $21,863. This student receives occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, has a consult with speech-language pathology assistant, and then receives inclusion services in the B grade for ELA and math, participates in our extended school year program, and has a one-to-one paraprofessional during that extended school year program, and also requires some assistive technology. So the per pupil spending for that one individual is $50,539, far above that $16,000 average PPE that we get for Northbridge. I won't read this whole one to you, but you can see similar. Another student, just a grade 7 student, the base PPE, this is also a low-income student. BCBA consult, that's a behavior therapist. Full B grade, so this student has an inclusion ELA, social studies, math, and science. Has a speech-language pathologist, 1 times 20 minutes per week. Receives academic support by a special education teacher 2 times 45 minutes per week, works with a reading specialist, sees a school adjustment counselor for self-regulation, and then works with a speech-language pathology assistant. So this student costs $34,773. And finally, this is a grade 10 student. Again, I'm not going to read through it. With their services, $46,274.84. And I show you these real examples from our students because you need to see how much it really costs us to educate students in this district versus the per pupil expenditure that we have.
We're allowed to ask questions, sorry?
Yeah.
Can you just explain the $6,730 for low income portion of our students? I get like if they're getting special services or equipment or the need or something, but what does that cover if they're low income versus the non-low income students?
So low-income students often often require more assistance and interventions, because perhaps they're coming from a poverty level, and it depends. There's a chart that the state gives us that shows us where we fall in that. So again, it can range from 4,000 to 9,000 based on the number of our low-income students. I think we were about 37%. But it costs more to educate because sometimes they need early reading intervention, additional reading intervention. No, those are for students with disabilities. So a low-income student is not necessarily a student with this disability. A low-income student could be a low-income student with no disability, but they maybe didn't have the same start that another student had because of their situation. So that's,
I guess it's like, so the low-income student who averages $6,700. Like, I mean, again, what does that cover? Can you break down $6,700?
no, that's just an allocation that the state gives to us because of the additional cost for the education. That's a number given to us. That's not a number that we choose.
So if we look at how our resources are allocated across our student populations, you can see that 58% of our staff service all of our students. You can see that 58% of our staff service all of our students. In addition to that 58%, another 41% of our staff provide services to our students with disabilities. 1% of our staff, which is 4 EL teachers, provide our services to EL students, in addition to the 58% that serve our non-EL students. So a similar breakdown can be seen in the budget allocation. 59% of the budget services all of our students. In addition to that, 9% specifically to support our students with disabilities, and an additional 1% is allocated for our EL students. So if you break the cost out as an average per student, you can see that the average cost for a student that does not have special needs and who is not an EL student is about $10,800. The average cost allocated to a student with disabilities is $50,000, and the average cost allocated to an EL student is $15,000. So where does the money come from to fund our operating budget? The main funding source for our operating budget is Chapter 70, which is state aid for education, and then also town contribution, which is the money that comes from the town, mainly from taxes. And those two added together is our appropriation, and that's the amount that's voted at town meeting. So our appropriation only makes up about 80%, or a little over 80% of our budget currently. So we need to make up the rest, which is what we call our budget gap, from grants and from revolver funds. So revolvers are primarily made up of fee-based revenue, or state reimbursements, and the money in the program that comes in for those activities then pays for the program or the service generated by that revenue. So we're currently expecting $16.2 million in Chapter 78 for next year. This will be the 13th year in a row that our Chapter 70 state aid has not increased by more than the minimum required increase per student. Our town contribution is proposed to increase by $391,000, resulting in our total appropriation increasing by $533,000, or the typical 2% appropriation increase that we will see. So we expect that our grant funds will remain relatively level to fiscal 25, about $1.1 million. And we anticipate being able to use about $4.6 million from our revolver accounts. This is the amount that we can use to leave $1 million emergency balance in those accounts. So the amount of revolver funds used in a budget typically should line up with the amount of revenue deposited into those revolver accounts. So if 2.3 or 2.6 million of annual revenues received, that also would be the amount that you'd expect to see spent. So we tend to use our revolver accounts to balance the budget. So if operating expenses come in lower than projected, then less funds are spent from revolver. Our revolver account has built up over time because there have been circumstances in our operating budget where we've come in under budget. So for example, we might budget a salary for a position. The position may remain vacant, we might not be able to fill that position. So we then don't pay that salary. So therefore, there's an amount of money that we budgeted that we didn't spend. So then, because we're coming in under budget, we're not spending that amount from the revolvers for that particular year, and that helps build up that balance. So the school committee asked that we put together a level services budget, given the flexibility to do reorganizations. So when that was totaled up, the fiscal 26 budget came in at $33,839,844. It's an increase of $1.5 million, or 4.65%, compared to our fiscal 25 budget. So when applying our revenue, if you apply the amount for our appropriation, grants, and revolver funds, our initial fiscal 26 deficit was $1.1 million.
So one of the things that we try to do every year when we see a deficit is figure out ways that we can address it ourselves without having to ask for more funding. How can we do it within our own constraints? So one of the things that we're doing, and it's not just for a fiscal reason, but because it is what's good for kids based on our current enrollment, is moving the 8th grade to the high school starting next year. This high school was built for 800 kids, and we have just over 400 kids in this building right now. So it would behoove us to move our students from the middle school, which we know is not in the best condition as it is, to the high school. We think it will help with our enrollment. We think it will help with retention. We think it will have a lot of great benefits for the 8th graders with exposure to upper level academics and electives, as well as participation in high school sports, among many other things. And we will talk more about this 8th grade transition at a separate meeting so that everybody can ask questions and learn more information about it. However, just for budget purposes, the move to the 8th grade will result in the reduction of a middle school music teacher, a middle school PE teacher, a middle school adjustment counselor, and 2 grade 8 teachers, as well as the reduction of a high school behavior tech, because we will be moving the middle school dean to the high school. Middle school positions that will be transferred to the high school will be 1 grade 8 ELA, 1 grade 8 math, 1 grade 8 science, 1 grade 8 social studies, 2 special ed inclusion teachers to go with the 8th grade students, and as I just mentioned, the middle school dean. So the cost reduction for this change is $324,603 off of that initial deficit.
So after that cost reduction of moving 8th grade to the high school is factored in, the draft budget showed a $1.1 million increase, 3.64%, but still had a deficit of $777,000. So where does our money go? Well, 69% of the budget is allocated to funding salaries and other compensation. It's not just salaries and hourly wages, but it also would include paper substitutes, summer programs, stipends, overtime. The next 2 largest portions of our budget are allocated to special ed out-of-district tuition and transportation. That's 15.1% of our budget, and then the cost associated with in-district transportation, which is 5.4%. You can see the remaining 10.2% is allocated to utilities, athletics, custodial maintenance, Title I, technology, and all other expenses. So when we're calculating the cost of our salary increases from one year to the next, the majority of staff, it's not just a negotiated percent that's being applied. Our collective bargaining agreements for teachers, IAs, custodians, school secretaries, they all have salary grids within the contracts, and those salary grids have steps. So it's the step raise and the negotiated percent that needs to be calculated. So this is an example of teacher salary grid. If you look at a teacher who may be on step M4, it's the 23-24 school year to the 24-25 school year. So if you look at a teacher who may be on master's step 4 in fiscal 24, they would move to master's step 5. So that's $57,380 moving to $62,402. That's a $5,000 increase. And then the grid has a 1.5% applied to it. So you would move from the fiscal 24 master's fiscal 24 master's 5 to the fiscal 25 master's 5, which is another $936. That's a total increase of $5,958, or 10.4%. If you happen to be a teacher who's on the top step, for example, master's 12, and you have a salary of $89,530, and you're moving from the 24 grid, 1.5% increase to the 25 grid, the salary increase is $1,343, or 1.5%. So when we calculated the cost of steps negotiated in fiscal '24 and what those teachers' pays would be in fiscal '25, the cost of steps in that 1.5% was $542,000. Our fiscal '24 to fiscal '25 appropriation increase was $542,000. So again, the appropriation increase isn't even necessarily enough to fund our contractual obligations for this one unit, let alone the other employees and transportation and employees in our district transportation. So we don't have a finalized contract in place right now for fiscal '26, but you can see what the cost of steps is and what the cost of each percent would be for fiscal '26 as well. So the second largest portion of our budget is other district tuition and transportation. These are the cost of placements for students with special needs that require that they attend a specialized outside district program. So we have 33 students requiring out-of-district placements for next year. And these are examples of some of the programs that we budget for. So again, it could be a collaborative program, a private day program, or a luncheon program. You can see what the daily rate is, the number of program days, and the annual tuition for those programs. In addition to that, there's the cost for transportation. So the cost for a van run could be somewhere between $28,000 or $124,000. We budget for 23 van runs for next year. On average, they're about $68,000 is the cost of transportation. So in-district transportation was the third largest portion of our budget. The year that we're in was the last year of our current transportation contract. So we went out to bid to renew that contract in December. The new contract increased by over $200,000 to provide the same services that we're receiving this year. So in order to help offset some of that cost increase, we do plan to cut a bus next year in the fiscal '26 budget and also cut our midday preschool run. We're not using that run currently, so we're just taking that out of the budget. These reductions will help offset the cost increase by about $101,000.
So 3 positions that we are looking to add for FY26. The first is a culinary home ec teacher here at a high school. So last year, about 800 students were surveyed at middle and high school, asking what kind of opportunities they would like to see at the middle school and high school for electives. What classes would make them come to school? What classes would they want to be here for? And the number one overall that most students responded to was woodshop. And as you know, we added a woodshop teacher this year. And those classes have been full to the brim with waiting lists. So it was a great move on our part. It makes many students very happy. We've got a lot of kids coming to school. Our attendance is improving. That could be for many reasons, but I would like to believe that giving students more voice and choice in what we offer is very important in maintaining a quality and comprehensive high school program here in Northbridge. The second position would be a special education inclusion teacher at the middle school. There are 25 students with disabilities in grade 7 that will be moving to the high school to grade 8. As a result of 2 middle school special ed teachers will move with this 8th grade class to the high school. And then we'll be adding 26 special education students into the incoming 6th grade. That's 12 more than what we currently have. So we're going to need to add an additional special ed position at the middle school to meet the needs of the 6th and 7th graders. And then at NES, adding another BCBA. The PK-5 caseload is 36 students and increasing. And we have 4 substantially separate programs that require very intensive supports at NES, and our current BCBA is just on fire every day. So this would allow us to be a little bit more proactive with our services and provide students what they truly need. So again, the level services also allow us to do some reorganization of positions, and we do this every year. You probably notice this every year in the budget. Oftentimes, we have a smaller class below, a larger class above, especially at the elementary levels, and we kind of swap teachers, so we maybe have 7 at this level this year, but then there's more kids moving up, we have to move 1 teacher to that next grade level. So we will be moving a grade 1 teacher to grade 2, just as you can see, because of the class size that's going into grade 2 for 2025-2026 school year. Also, these are essentially swap positions to meet our needs. So one of the things we were looking for was a partial vocational coordinator. As you may know, our current dean/vocational coordinator at the high school is retiring. And we were not going to backfill that dean position, but we do need the vocational coordinator position because we are building that internship program at the high school. So our current athletic director has experience as a vocational coordinator. So we tapped him and his skills. So he is going to take on some of that vocational coordinator responsibility. And we will be adding an athletic trainer, which has been a position that has been brought to our attention by many coaches and parents and community members and our previous athletic directors. We weren't able to get a part-time athletic trainer. We just weren't able to hire anybody. We had it out there for a long time. People are looking for full-time positions. So by getting a full-time trainer and allowing that person to take some of the AD's administrative duties, the AD will be able to act as both AD and vocational coordinator. This will also cut the need for contracted EMTs or contracted trainers that we have to hire per game. Another reorganization would be with our nurses. We previously had a .6 resource nurse and a half-time per diem nurse in the district. Again, the resource nurse left the district, the per diem nurse, the part-time, we were not able to fill. People are not looking for part-time work. And we had a 1-to-1 LPN for a student full day at NES. That student who that nurse was working for only requires services for a small portion of the day. So we decided that we would reorganize these positions so that we would have a full-time per diem nurse, so that we'd be more likely to fill that role. That per diem nurse will cover the needs of that NES student and then spend the remainder of their time at the high school with our current nurse there as we're moving the 8th grade up. So there'll be more coverage at the high school. And then we do have a new PK student that's coming in with a need for a 1-to-1 LPN. So we would trade that position, just trade that position out. Net neutral. Actually, we'd save 0.4 FTEs in this scenario. Speech and language, again, there's a shortage of speech language pathologists. So we were not able to fill a full-time speech pathologist that we needed here at the high school. We were able to hire an SLPA. So our current speech and language pathologist at the middle school is now kind of overseeing that SLPA, supervising that SLPA. So instead of having 2 full-time speech pathologists, we have a full-time speech pathologist and a full-time SLPA who is supervised by that speech language pathologist, and they'll work back and forth between the middle and high school. Still able to manage the same caseload. But now we actually have 2 full-time people doing it. And then finally, we would reduce 0.6 of an adjustment counselor here at the high school. We currently have 2 full-time adjustment counselors, one that is just assigned to our freshman academy, and then 1.6 that is funded through a grant that only serves our students in our BRIGHT program, and that's only a very small population of our students. So by cutting 1 full-time adjustment counselor, we could add 0.4 FTE to the BRIGHT position, which is grant funded, to make that a whole FTE. So that counselor could serve both the BRIGHT kids and all students. In addition, we would continue to have our 3 other school counselors, who are our guidance counselors, as well as a school psychologist. So we would still have plenty of coverage for all our kids in the building. So we have a program that's funded through our comprehensive school health grant, And it's our students that may be transitioning back from a hospitalization or from a long absence. And then high school tennis would be a reduction. We no longer have tennis courts available in town anywhere, so it doesn't really make sense for us to continue to do this in the future. Who knows what could happen? But for right now, this cost reduction would include our coaching stipends, the transportation, the court rentals, and supplies would be a savings of $18,211.
So after all of the reorganizations and reductions, you can see that the breakdown for our fiscal 26 draft operating budget shows the increase of 1.1 million, 6%. You can see that in salaries and unrestricted tuition, transportation, those have the largest increases dollar-wise. And you also see the large percent increase in athletics, but that again factors in the trainer and the more expensive transportation cost for athletic trips. So circling back to the 2026 budget deficit, 777,000. Again, there are three main options to close this gap. One would be increasing the appropriation. Two would be utilizing additional funds from the revolvers. Or three would be budget reductions.
So if we do not find another solution, we will be looking at additional reductions to what we just talked about, which would include cutting supplies and materials, a certain amount of supplies and materials from each school as well as from the district office, cutting middle school athletics, cutting 3 non-varsity sports at the high school, cutting some athletic supplies, uniforms, and equipment, cutting the transportation coordinator position for the district, cutting a foreign language teacher at the high school, changing the school year secretary at the high school, changing guidance to school year, reduction of a library clerk at the high school, and then at NES, cutting a grade K teacher, and along with that, a grade K instructional assistant, cutting a grade 1 teacher, a grade 2 teacher, a grade 3 teacher, a grade 4 teacher. Obviously, you can see class sizes increase. We cut a special ed teacher, K inclusion. A grade 1 special ed teacher would be cut, but we would add a instructional assistant to cover some of those services. A grade 2 special ed teacher, and again, add an instructional assistant to cover those. Cut the librarian at NES, which is the only librarian we have left in the district. And then change 1 full year secretary to a school year secretary at NES. And it seems like there's a lot of cuts at NES, but for those of you that recall last year, our cuts were mainly at middle and high school. So this would result in 11 FTEs reduced.
So looking back over 10 years, you'll see that with the exception of adding some positions in 2022, when we received ESSER COVID grant funds, our budgets have either been level services, or we've been making reductions. And again, Kate just mentioned, just a reminder, some of those positions that we cut in 2025 when we needed to reduce our level services budget by $700,000.
So as we showed you a slide that showed kind of the special populations in the various districts around the Blackstone Valley, this shows our in-district per pupil expenditures. So this is the overall cost of educating each student in the district calculated by dividing our operating costs by our total enrollment, which as you saw was 1,838 kids. So we have the second lowest per pupil expenditure in the Blackstone Valley. Only second to Grafton, which probably surprises you because we all know Grafton has more money than we do. But if you think back to that slide I showed you, their numbers for low income, for students with disabilities, for EL, for high needs were far, far below ours. It costs a lot less to educate those students than it does to educate ours. Again, these are their numbers. As you can see, Northbridge, Bellingham, Milford. Milford's obviously a much, much bigger district than us, but Bellingham is about the same size. and almost 50% of our students fall into that high needs category. We also have the second highest low income population in the Blackstone Valley, only second to, again, Milford. So this is a net school spending chart. Again, just kind of driving home the point. Net school spending is the minimum amount that a district must spend on education to comply with state law. This is determined not by us. And as you can see, we spend 1% over what is required on education here. Bellingham spends 47% above what is required. And you can see the surrounding towns and what they spend above net school spending. And again, it's variable, but what I wanted to point out by putting the chart back in here is Bellingham has a very high needs population, but they're spending the money to service that high needs population. Millbury is right behind us with a high needs population, but again, they're spending 40% over net school spending, and we are spending 1%.
Just clarification on the net school spending. Formula of that would be Chapter 70, which is pretty much the same for every school district. Right? The formula is the same across the state. So when you look at 1% over, and you try to figure out where that deficit is, it's local appropriations.
Okay. And when we use Chapter 70, we get far less. I don't know the numbers, I've been trying to find them, but we used to get upwards of $1 million in Chapter 70 money from the state. We now get just less than half of that. So
Because
we're
the
not
enrollment
getting,
is not down.
we're not getting the money from the state, we're not getting the money from the town. And if you think we can afford to cut a teacher at each grade level and in the elementary school and not see the impact directly day to day, then you're kidding yourself. These are, when I was on the school committee back in 2015, when we cut $1.1 million out of the budget, that was the culinary arts program, that was Spanish, that was a 5 or 6 FTE. And the reason you're feeling that at the elementary school, at the middle school now, is because of those cuts that happened, 8, 10 years ago. So if you think that taking away a teacher at every grade level in a brand new state-of-the-art building is not going to have a dramatic effect, those are staggering numbers. Let alone the fact that if we drop below 1% in net school spending, the state's in charge. We're no longer in charge. And they can raise our program, they do whatever they want, essentially. So this is way more dire than I think. You guys have done an excellent job with the numbers, but I want to put I've been a teacher for 20 years in Milford. And this is drastic. This is as ridiculous as it gets. We could afford to cut $1.1 million because our revolver was able to keep up, which we shouldn't have been doing at all. But Melissa did a great job to keep us at a place where we could survive. That is no longer feasible.
And just one other quick point to the local appropriation. It is a formula, right? And we're meeting the minimum of that here. With local taxes, which would be controlled not by Chapter 70 money, but by the appropriation money that the town decides the school is going to get out of local taxes that it collects.
So just back to the required spending.
I've looked at the chart, seen the charts, I've tried to make sense of it, it's very overwhelming. I'm sure it's a lot of people in here too. I'm kind of asking earlier, the amount of money for the low income or student with special needs, or these students cost more. So on the low income student, it's $6,700 extra dollars. That's money that we could get for those students, correct? So it's we have a high number of special needs, low income, young learners. So I'm confused at where this deficit comes in, but shouldn't we be getting more money from the state for those students?
We get a certain amount, but it does not keep up.
All the downstream, the Bellingham gets the same amount, all the other school districts?
They do, but then their town gives them more to make up the budget gap. The money that we get from Chapter 70 from the state, they're not keeping up. with what the actual costs and the needs are. They're not. And I'm part of the Mass Association of School Superintendents, and I'm on the executive committee. We're fighting really hard. We met with our legislators 2 weeks ago with 16 of our senators and representatives to beg them to help us to fight to change these formulas, because we can't function like this. We can't build budgets, we cannot educate kids in a community that is not affluent.
Like, in part of, like, our taxes in Northbridge are considerably lower than all of other towns, even with the new elementary school, the fire station, all the things. So if we're spending apparently 54% of our town budget, I don't know if you can verify that or not, on the schools, these other towns, they're spending 54% of their town budget, right, is much higher. I'm not really asking a question, I'm just kind of like informing, I don't know, I spent a lot of time trying to answer this all. I guess I'm just kind of talking myself through it to try to make sense of it all, because it's hard to get here. Anyway, sorry.
Could I just piggyback up to you? So when you say these other towns are spending more, are you saying that the town is giving a higher percentage? Or are you saying that their tax rates are higher and therefore the schools are receiving more, or potentially both?
Potentially both.
Okay, still just on required spending. We're posting fiscal 23 numbers because those are the latest ones published by the state for all the districts to do comparisons. But for reference, we did meet our required spending in 2024. We met it by $40,000. And in 2025 budget, the letter you'll see up here from Jesse basically is telling us that the budget that they're looking at for us that we had submitted shows us not meeting it by $41,000. So in fiscal 26, what Jesse puts out for a formula in a number says that our required spending is increasing by $1,022,000. The fiscal 26 appropriation increase to the school department is proposed to go up by $533,000.
So this is probably nothing surprising to any of you, but it is a vicious cycle, the underfunding. When we don't have funding, we have to cut staff and programs. And then, of course, more students want a school choice out to districts that have the staff, the programs, the classes. And then the staff that stays wants to leave too, because they want to eat. Right, and then we still have to pay for the kids that leave. We have to pay school choice out for the kids that leave us to go to another district that's offering more. And then our good staff want to leave too, because why wouldn't they? And then our programming gets decimated, as it has in the past. And then the students that are here, we have increased discipline and attendance issues because we don't have enough staff to keep our kids safe. Our class sizes have gone up. We don't have the mental health and support staff available for them. Our dropout rates increase. And then we're unable to hire quality staff because everybody hears the reputation and they don't want to come. And you know, it's happened in other districts, I'm sure you've heard of. And then we end up with a staff exodus and student achievement goes down the tubes. So this is a flashback slide. We showed this slide last year when we presented last year's budget because we saw this coming. We've seen this coming since we found out ESSER funds were going to be deleted. When we lost ESSER, we knew that we were not going to be able to continue to fund our operating budget with our revolver funds because you cannot predict what money is going to come in or what expenses are going to be going out. Like you saw, one out-of-district placement can cost us $400,000 for one single student. And that student could move to Northbridge tomorrow. We have no idea of knowing that. That's why we try to maintain a certain balance in our revolver for those emergency things that didn't happen. But last year, we let people know we expected to have $1 million to $3 million deficit moving forward because of the town appropriation, because of the amount of revolver funds that we had available to close the gap. We knew that we had teacher contracts and instructional aid contracts coming up for this year. We don't know what that's going to cost us yet because those have not been finalized. We knew the transportation contract was going to go up. We weren't sure of the FY25 budget versus what the actual would be, because again, we have to start this process in September. Sometimes we don't know the numbers until the spring or even later. Changes in out-of-district students, they can move out, they can move in, they could come back to the district, or their placement could change. They could go from a less restrictive to a more restrictive, which may cost more. And then the level services versus funding the district strategic plan. What is good for our kids? So again, these were pictures that were in each of the budgets that I presented to school committee, FinCom, Board of Selectmen in FY 2024 and FY 2025. You know, ESSER was helping us kind of climb that mountain at that time. We also had different SEL and mental health grants post-COVID that DESE was offering to us that kind of helped offset some positions. Our title grants helped with that. We had some revolver funds carried over from prior years because of decreased expenses. Obviously, during COVID, our utility prices went down. We didn't have to pay for certain things because we weren't in the buildings for a lot of the time. But then FY25, we knew we were going to be climbing that ridge again with the loss of ESSER grants, losing those SEL mental health grants. We still have title grants, but those could change at any time based on the feds. Revolver funds carry over from prior years. Those are going to be gone. And then continued salary increases. The salaries go up no matter what, because there's always that built-in COLA in every contract. And you saw that, 1% of an increase is going to cost us close to $200,000 just for one unit. That doesn't include everybody else. And then again, our continued population changes. The changing demographic and the cost of a single student, and I showed you some of those examples. These are slides from last year. We've been talking about this, and I hate talking about it because it's heartbreaking to me. But the potential negative impacts we mentioned last year would be reduction of staff, reduction or elimination of athletics extracurriculars, reduction of facilities. I won't read them all to you, but these are exactly what's happening. This is exactly what we predicted based on everything that's been happening over the past several years here. So looking ahead to FY27, so those are my flashbacks. This is my flash forward. On the left, this is what we just presented to you, our draft 2026 budget and our budget deficit of $777,000. The potential 2027 budget with a 3.5 increase, which is our average. Other towns have 5, 6, 7, 8% increases. We're only saying 3.5% just to meet our level service needs would be $33,800,000 with a 2% appropriation increase, which is what we typically get, and leveled grants, and the revolvers representing only incoming revenue of $2,600,000. We'd be looking at a $2.6 million deficit for FY27. So in FY26, 11 total FTEs would have to be cut to meet that 777 deficit, plus other items. FY 2027, potentially multiply that by 4. And again, our budget is built for level services to meet the needs of our kids. And when we created that strategic plan, our plan was to give our students voice and choice. Give our students good programming so that they could be successful and not want to go to all different schools or school choice out. We want our kids to stay here. We can offer them an excellent education. We have great educators, we have great buildings, we have great people and great families. And we should be able to give our kids what they need. And that was the goal of our plan from 2024 to 2027. Provide instructional pathways and learning environments that align to their needs and interests. Woodshop, culinary, astronomy, maybe landscaping. And then provide formal structures for students to provide their input and influence decisions we make for the district. And a district-wide system to make sure every student has a positive role model. Well, if we have to cut half our staff, there's going to be nobody left for our kids. So that's our dismal budget for this year and more dismal for next year. And we're certainly open for questions. We still have some time. If you don't want to ask questions in this environment, you can scan that QR code on your phone. It'll go directly to a little Google form that I created. Ask any questions. I am going to create a whole FAQ document to respond to any questions and provide any information you might need. We'll post it all on the website, but we are happy to entertain questions or comments now. Sorry.
First, thank you very much for sharing all of this, but can you, or do you know what it would mean more specifically, Joe said, if the state takes over? Because I've heard horror stories in terms of what that means. Can you give us some examples of what that would mean?
So the state doesn't typically take over for fiscal purposes, but they would take over for performance reasons. And if we don't have any staff, obviously that's going to impact student achievement and student performance. And when your performance levels go down, the state will take over, like Southbridge. They've been a level 5 district under receivership now for 7 years, I think. And when a receiver comes in, the school committee essentially does not exist. The receiver is in charge of everything. The school committee has no say. The administrators have no say. The teachers really have no say.
Can we
That
lose
receiver-
certification, is that true? Or
I'm
can
sorry.
we lose like a certification or something like that? Like kids trying to get into college, maybe accreditation, excuse me.
Accreditation. I mean, I think that would be a long way down the road, but essentially, yeah, if we don't meet certain accountability requirements.
Thank you.
So, education.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question. So as we're looking at student needs, why are all the cuts we're looking at teachers?
Yes.
And people who work directly with students? Why aren't we looking at, for example, like the new 504 coordinator that was hired previously? That was a principal's job to handle all of that. Why is that a new position with a new salary? And we're looking at cutting people who are working directly with students. Why aren't we looking at positions that don't work directly with students before we're looking at teachers and parents?
Well, we do look at all potential cuts. The 504 coordinator is needed because our principals don't have time to do that. Our especially at the elementary school where the buildings are on fire, our administrators, yeah, currently we're short one assistant principal.
And if we're short that assistant principal and they're able to handle that now, why aren't we looking to cut that moving forward to next year?
They're not able to handle it. All of us go in there and sub down low. That's
I'm just
not
wondering, if we're looking at adding to class sizes, that's adding more workload onto the teachers directly and stressing the classrooms. So I'm just trying to get a better picture of why we're looking at making the class sizes bigger, cutting that many teachers from NES, you know, especially from inclusion classrooms.
We don't want to. We don't want to. But again, as you saw, we cut several of the middle. We did. We did.
Sorry, but just, can you outline like what the next steps are for us? Obviously, for, excuse me, a lot of people, this is not great news. So like, what can we do if we don't want those budget cuts to move forward or have another plan, right? It's raising taxes, but what is that like?
So,
basically, anyone in here who cares about what happens next should be at every school committee, finance committee, and selection committee meeting from now until the spring election. Which is in May. You should go every Monday, every Tuesday there's a school committee meeting, Monday is selection, Tuesday school committee meeting, Wednesday is finance committee meeting. Because they don't understand. I don't think they were prepared for this many people to show up tonight. I don't think they understand what happens when 30 people fill a room. Their meetings, I mean, the school committee members here can attest. There's no one in the audience, there's no one ever at a selectmen's meeting, there's no one ever at a finance committee meeting. Going there, going to public comment, saying this is unacceptable, is immediately what everybody in here could do. That's number one. And number two, there will be likely an override committee where people need to get out in the community and raise awareness. And 6,000 people voted the day the school was approved.
Joe, maybe not, maybe you don't know right now.
Well, I don't want to do too much symbolize. I'll say this. 6,000 people voted for the school, or voted the day of the school. 4,000 people voted for the school. Those are astronomical numbers for the town of Northbridge. That's 2/3. That's a mandate that families support education in town. So I will make myself known, like to everybody, student. There are no override means we raise taxes more than is allowed, but it takes a town vote, and that has to happen in the spring. It
To
needs to
your
be.
point, we're a very low tax rate compared, if not the lowest compared to.
We are the lowest.
Compared to all of the
Even
surrounding
the
towns.
temporary tax increase that they were on the building, and
Can I ask though, it feels like no brainer, right? Like I came from another school district, and I moved into a school district, and I've been teaching for 15 years, and it was a little bit of a shock to me to come here. I have 4 kids, and I'm worried about my 4 kids going through the school system. I have a preschooler about to enter kindergarten, and I'm not sure it's being staffed appropriately there. So I think that it sounds like most of the students of like mine. So what is the message? Who needs the message in order to make sure that people understand? I don't know what we're up against. I think I'm naive about what is the opposition. Because it's
nobody wants to pay more taxes.
That's-
There's a lot of low-income families in town that are on a fixed income. Even a small raise in their taxes, like, they can't afford it. And I'm
Your
just playing devil's-
opposition is.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
No, I agree.
Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Yeah, sure, raise my taxes, yay, right?
No,
But you have to, what's the alternative?
25, on average, about 2,500 people vote no in this town, repeatedly year after year. So you need 2,501 person.
So is it gonna say, I don't have kids in the school, I don't care.
So how do we speak to that school? Like about like your hometown will go down. If these schools plummet and our school ratings go down, our hometown is going down. So what message should we deliver to the opposition that's going to ring true? Because I'm passionate, I have kids, you probably have kids in the district. And I think that if we're gonna send this all out there as a message, what is our message other than the fact that our kids need it for people who don't have kids, who don't have extra funds? What message can deliver that will bring something? We need to brainstorm. But I do think that in solidarity, we need to deliver a message that is going to land and impact.
Welcome to Northbridge. I'm so glad. I'm a county, and this is, I could cry, like, to hear that point of view, because there are 2,500 people who are going to say no, and I'm not going to put all of my efforts into changing their minds, because I'm not going to change their minds. It's been decades.
No, you can change people's minds. I did it when I came, I did it in 2018 when nobody wanted to build these schools.
Then you guys hate those people. I don't have to. But it's the people who you think this is an amazing turnout. Like this is what we need. And just conversations, and people are going to have disagreements and have different financial things, of course. But just even that is
Because we're not going to respond back.
exactly.
New
This is a breath of fresh air.
New passion.
Here I have small kids, and I know a lot of new families. I can see some of my.
But why did you come here? Because it's a low tax rate? So you couldn't afford a
I
house in Franklin,
couldn't
right?
afford
Or
a house,
hockey stick.
yes.
I couldn't.
And so I don't know that everybody's gonna buy and adjust to get that our students need accommodated. So I'm sorry, the other question. Go ahead.
So being that I'm a renter, and as you expressed, there's a fairly large low-income population in this town. And unless I miss something, at least none of the old resters be filing from taxes. But as far as I know it, you know, and I come from the village, which has a lot of children, and there's a lot of
name, presence known, because we can't do any, please correct me if I'm wrong, but nothing will change unless a ballot is on the ballot for us to vote for the override. And we can't get that unless the school committee votes unanimously to put it on there. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the first step is to convince the school committee that we need to move forward with an override vote. Is that true?
Yeah.
And that's at 7 tonight.
And just, my wife's gonna kill me, but. My name's Joe Skrzula. I waited this long to put together an override committee. We put one together for the school. Just keep an eye on social media. I have limited reach and influence on social media, but the goal is to get a coalition of residents and voters together who are willing to spend the next 2 months knocking on doors, looking at who voted in past elections, see how willing they are to support the school, and if they are willing to support the school, collecting information so we can be contacting them, sending them information, and getting them out to vote during the spring election. But you're right, that can't happen if the school committee doesn't support the budget with an override, hopefully unanimously. If the selectman supports it, hopefully unanimously. Same with the finance committee. The school committee puts forward a budget. The selectman's responsible for putting that article on the ballot. So, and obviously you want the finance committee support as well. So there's work to be done, but I think that the passing of the school and having over 4,000 people support that building, which is $100 million. We're not talking about, an addition to a building. That was a huge project. And so building on all kind of the little pieces from the presentation today makes it easier to kind of communicate that message.
So, sorry. Quick question. Is there anything more we can do, for exploring new grant opportunities to offset some of that?
We are frankly, both myself, Mrs. Walker, and our curriculum director, Phil Healy, we are always on the hunt for grants. Even our teachers are always on the lookout for even the smaller grants. So we do try to pursue everything that we are eligible for. Yeah. It's always been an avenue for us.
Far more grace than I do.
Anybody have a we swing for the fences here, we look at 10% tax increase, but what are we looking at for increase in taxes, not just for 2026, 2027, but like, obviously that number's never going down, only going to get bigger. So if we're going to pass an override, we go too small, we're back here again. It is.
That would be a decision of the committee to decide what that number would be.
Yes, it can also.
Maybe at the school committee meeting, we'll find out. We'll try to find out the last meeting.
I just think I know another thing that people have said, what can we do? One of the things to do is when you leave this meeting today, and if you do stay, this is not, I know there's a perception in the town, because I've been here long enough, that it is a scare tactic. It is reality. And you really need to know that that 44 layoff, possibly the following year, is real. I've lived through a 67 person, was it 67, Melissa? It was like 67 teachers were laid off. And it took years to recoup from that. 44, it's going to take years to recoup. It is not a scare tactic. It is the reality of our schools, and even that 11 FTEs for next year is going to take years to recoup again. We just don't hire them back. For years we hear level funding. So if we hear level funding next year, those 11 are not in there. It's going to take years. So if you leave this meeting and talk to your neighbor, talk to your friend, they say, they're just trying to scare you. They are not. This is reality of our budget. So just make sure that you get that message across as well. It takes a long time to recoup that.
clarify and answer to the young lady's question about what the next steps would be, Joe said that he has started the coalition for the 2.5 override. I grew up in this town. The woman who spoke to you stated that you're not going to change anybody's mind. She also grew up in this town. And we can tell you that never, ever has a Proposition 2.5 override passed. And so, to be honest, when we put the field on the ballot, when we put the fire station on the ballot, and we knew what the fire station was before we built the new one, it was disgraceful. So people that grew up in this town didn't believe that it was going to happen. The field, the fire station, people showed up on election day for those two things. So the most important thing that you can do is show up on election day. Make sure everybody you know shows up on election day, because I can guarantee you that the naysayers are going to show up on election day.
Can I jump in, Erin, and just say, if I'm not mistaken, you have to first show up for town meeting to get it on the ballot for election day, so it takes 2 votes. If it doesn't pass at town meeting, it doesn't move forward to election day. So yes, you have to show up at town meeting also.
And let's get on the ballot and let us make the decision on how we want to support our schools or not support our schools. Leave it up to the town and the people who are invested in their children.
Is there a way to have all of these charts and all of this information sent home in a newsletter to all of the families? I know not everybody's going to read it, and obviously not everybody's here. There are some of us that are here and we're listening to and understanding it, but when you ask for an override, a lot of these families, you say it's because of budget cuts in school, they don't know how severe it is, and they're just kind of taking our word and not really listening. But maybe even if you get another 25% of parents to actually look through it, and maybe some brief explanations of each one. Obviously, you explain them here, but maybe a little bit of explanation of each one or something to dumb it down for everybody. Just might be more people.
And this meeting has been recorded.
Yeah. I know that people are not going to, there's going to be a lot of people that will go watch it,
But we can certainly send out the slide deck.
yeah.
We'll post it online first thing tomorrow morning as well. And we'll offer more meetings. I mean, Melissa and I don't mind who comes, I mean, we're here every day. So we work on it. So we're happy to do additional meetings for informational purposes, because that's really our role, is just to provide you guys with the information and the numbers and be as transparent as possible. So we're happy to, provide additional information sessions on the same information or additional information. If you want us to dig deeper for certain things, we're happy to do that.
Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the override committee will also be disseminating information that might be easier to understand without Amy and Melissa's explanation, right? Without their explanation, how many of us would have understood that? But I believe, Joe, that we will disseminate information that's easier to understand.
Yes, you said we too.
Information that they are talking about all of these
I can't send that home through
I'll post it on all the class pages up until current 5th grade. That's what I got. I got current preschool, do current 5th grade, and I will post it all over those. I already did, someone might have seen it.
Tina's going.
And, I'm not a school employee, so I'm probably more free to speak and whatever. So we'll just put it that way, so like some school employees and teachers and they're
For anybody talking to anybody else, when you look at the charts, special needs community is one of the largest draws. So a lot of people are going to say and stand on their blocks and say, we should cut funding from that. Just so everyone's clear, if the school can't provide services for these children, it'll become catastrophically expensive to teach these children. It goes to $50,000 per student per year, as opposed to 10. So cutting from there is awful.
And you can't buy one. You can't take the services away from the kids anyway. So
But for you, some students can't be provided for, so that's a fact.
and they end up out of district.
Exactly.
And they end up out of district because they don't pay enough for these positions to have people man these positions. How many positions do we have? How many warm bodies do we have because we're barely paying minimum wage?
Don't let people come at you with that, because that's what that is.
Quick question on the Thompson override. My understanding is this first year, I don't know that you can speak to this, but maybe Joe or somebody knows. The first year it would go to school, that budget increase that the town would have. But I don't know what happens to those funds afterwards, which I think goes to Joe's point that it's important that we go to finance committee and board of selectmen meetings to know that.
Specify the use.
Can I speak, can I respond to that? I did get an email, I did ask a question for the town manager, for the statute in year one. The year that the override is voted, and if it does go through, it has to be used for the intended purposes on the ballot question. So after that becomes part of the general fund revenues, it can be used for any purpose. As for the, I said to him, I had specified, my question was, if this does pass, is the extra tax generated revenue specifically to be used for the school, or can the town manager allocate it elsewhere? He says that's for the town manager makes recommendations at town meeting, but the voters decide how to spend the funds through appropriate.
If anybody goes to the town meeting, they like to put a lot of, we would like to have up front, I noticed this, we would like a new library. Everyone wants a new library, nobody wants to buy a book. What they like to do is they'd like to bury, like, you don't have an option to spend money on, like the landfill repair, which is gonna cost millions of dollars. So everybody's clear, go to those meetings and stay for the whole meeting. And look at the book, because you're gonna spend all your money on wants, and you're still gonna spend on the house.
Does anybody have any other questions for?
Hey, man, I just have something that, a lot of wonderful questions here in the process. I just wanted to add something to what Joe Struzula and some of you. Also, I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen, Brian Paulus, Selectman Wilkes here. We had a meeting last night. Joe came, made public comment. We're here to kind of just gather more information in this process. I just wanted to let you know about some deadlines in this process too that, you know, I keep hearing town meeting in May, which is right, that would be the first step, and then the second step would be a ballot question. The Board of Selectmen presented with putting it on the ballot. But before any of that happens, an article has to be submitted by March 7th to be put on the warrant. March 7th is the deadline. Our next selectmen meeting is March 10th, where we will vote to close the warrant. It's in our bylaws, strange bylaws, it's 7 Fridays before the town meeting date, the warrant closes. So that's March 7th. That's in a week and 4 days. So if an article is not presented, such as an override or what you're proposing, it won't be on the warrant for town meeting.
I don't have to propose an article.
It's on tonight's agenda.
I just wanted to be clear on that, so then if that were to happen, the next step would be, it's by March 7th, March 10th, at our meeting, there are already 26 or 27 articles. It would be a nice long town meeting. And that would be added. We would look at it and certify the warrant, and then from there, you have until our April meeting where we would meet, hopefully, to go through this, and Superintendent and Ms. Walker would come to put that ballot question for borrowing on the ballot if it passes town meeting. Does that make sense? So there are some parameters and deadlines that need to be met. Just want to make sure everybody is clear on that.
All right. Are there any other questions for Mrs. Walker or myself? Again, feel free to use the QR code. We're going to pack it up and get it upstairs in the media center. Thank you all so much